There we go. You can hear my voice through the speakers as well. I've got a booming voice now. I could be a rugby player. Fantastic. 306 appearances, was it, for Wasps? So says Wikipedia.
Mine's not working. It's slightly more, but...
Okay, so let's not start off on the wrong foot. Around about 71 appearances for England. So Simon Shaw joins us. Will Fraser, flanker for Saracens, fantastic player at international level, also represented England Saxons. And closest to me here, Charlie Hodgson, Sale and Saracens. You still hold the record as the leading Premiership scorer, is that right?
Yes.
Is there anyone, on your heels about to steal that record away from you, Charlie?
At the moment, I don't think there is, no. The thing is, the guys get dragged away a lot now. If you look at Owen and George Ford, they're away with England probably more than they are with their clubs. So for them to build up any sort of total is going to be difficult, and they certainly get looked after better than we did back in the day when we were playing. Literally, turn back up the Sale and you'd be thrown back into another fixture without any rest. So that's probably one of the reasons why I managed to build up so many points.
How many of those were drop goals?
Not that many, actually.
Not that many?
No.
Did you get any drop goals?
No. Didn't get many tries either, but that's another conversation.
Well, there was a famous drop goal, of course, in a World Cup.
Only second row ever to get a drop goal in the Premiership.
Oh, fantastic.
Viv's got one.
And is that available on social media? Will people better Google it now?
It was so long ago, I don't think cameras even existed.
And if it does, it's in black and white and 4x3, and we all look better in 4x3. Right, let's talk about the World Cup. We can't get this conversation underway without talking about England's performance. Barring that last hurdle, do you agree with me, gentlemen? That was an amazing World Cup, Simon.
It's an extraordinary World Cup. I was there. I was lucky enough to be there for 6 weeks in total. I think the earliest I got in from a night out was about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was an extraordinary thing, extraordinary place. If any of you haven't been to Japan, I highly recommend it. It's an extraordinary place. They hosted it fantastically well. All the games, including obviously the upsets that Japan managed to achieve, were just exactly what the tournament needed. It just, there was the hurricane or the typhoon incident, which could have dampened things, but Japan went on to beat Scotland, which any Scots people in here? So we all enjoyed that tremendously, and it was just phenomenal to be there. But as you say, the England performance up until the final was extraordinary. Started off a bit wobbly at the start. They couldn't seem to hold on to the ball. They had some sort of difficulty managing the ball, but overcame that and produced one of the best, well, I think the best performances I've ever seen for England against the All Blacks. And people will say, was that their final? Was that?
Yes, it was.
I just think the top 4 sides in the world, there's so little between them, and in order to have a sequence of victories, say if you ask New Zealand to play Australia, England, South Africa back to back, they'd lose one of them. Likewise, South Africa, they'd lose one of them. Unfortunately, the sequence wasn't right. At that stage of the tournament, you can't afford to lose any of them. But South Africa get that loss out of their way at the start of the tournament, the first result, and can build from there and arguably have an easier route into the final. England have to beat the 3 next best sides in the world back to back, and that's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. Not necessarily physically, not necessarily tactically, but mentally. Incredible feat if they were to do it.
Let's talk about some of the individual successes. Carl Sinclair, so sad to be lost so early in the final match. Will, how costly was that for England?
I think it's when you get into finals, whether it's club level, international level, World Cup finals, there's a huge amount of emotion and adrenaline running into those games. So I think to have a stoppage 2 minutes into a game, a fairly lengthy stoppage, and for the England boys to see someone they care about be on the floor in the state that Carl was in is going to take its toll. which I think makes it even more impressive that South Africa were able to deal with that and then produce the performance that they did. So I do think it had an impact. Carl's a massive ball carrier for the team, adds so much to the game, not taken away from Dan Cole when he came on, but I think we could all probably agree that at least for the first hour we'd rather Kyle be on the pitch than Dan Cole. So I think it did have an impact, but I'm sure, or none of us are using that as an excuse, and I'm sure if you ask the lads themselves that definitely wouldn't be an excuse used for why we lost the game.
And Charlie, rugby is such a tactical game. How much of an influence will the coach have had? And is he to blame at all in the performance England put out in that final against South Africa?
There's no press, by the way.
Yeah. I suppose you can only do as much as you can before the players go out. He has admitted since that he made a few costly decisions on selection. Perhaps should have gone back to a different centre partnership. But ultimately, it's the players that are on there at the time, and they're the ones that take that responsibility. And I think tactically at the time, first 10 minutes when they're trying to throw the ball from their own line, whether the pressure got to them, I don't know what was going on, but doing things which didn't really happen earlier on in the tournament, yet for some reason the heads had exploded and they were doing things that you wouldn't expect them necessarily to do. So they'll be disappointed with what actually happened in that moment.
And as a player that's played in some amazing top games for both club and country, how do you get mentally focused? And do you think there was an issue coming off of such a terrific victory against New Zealand to remain focused and mentally right for that final game?
I think as Shawsey says, to be able to back up those three big games, three big Southern Hemisphere teams, to have that mental focus, to be able to do it all over again, it takes its toll. And perhaps it was one game too far, and South Africa had perhaps an easier route into the final. And obviously with everything that was going on around it, with Carl Sinclair's injury, I think there are a lot of things that played into their hands.
Will, is it stressful stepping out there in front of a crowd, in front of the television cameras? Can that affect performance? And how do you deal with it?
Well, my answer is no. In terms of when you're going out, you're not going out, well, Charlie might have, he's much better looking than me, but I never went out looking at the cameras or thinking I'm on TV or anything like this.
They found you though, they found you.
Charlie, yeah, that was more Charlie's game than me. That was, but you don't, it's just a byproduct of kind of your job essentially. So you've had your whole week's prep. You know what you're doing out on the pitch. It's very much a case of just going out and do it. So it is a very stressful situation, but nothing to do with the fact that, for me anyway, that had nothing to do with the fact that the games were on TV or the crowd. Actually, if anything, that helped because it was an extra pick me up. It was an extra thing to kind of spur you on. As long as you knew what you had to do in the pitch, you know your role, you knew as a team you were as well prepared as you can be, then in many ways kind of the Saturday or the Sunday takes care of itself.
Simon, can you teach a player that, to shut everything out, to focus?
I'm not a great believer in shutting your emotions out. I think it's something that's now quite a major part of the game. A lot of sports psychologists will argue the point, fixate on process, and as you said, the preparation's all been done. You know your role, you know your responsibilities. Keep thinking about the next process, the next stage. I drew heavily from the crowd. I drew heavily from the occasion. People talk about big game players, and there's probably a reason for that. Some people get drawn into the emotion of the occasion in a negative way. Some people get drawn into the occasion in a positive way. I was one that I was explaining earlier that my experience very early on in my career, where I was essentially playing amateur rugby, was around a load of portly middle-aged men who like to drink a lot, and so our match day preparation was a load of laughs and giggles before a match because most of us have been out the night before. So there's a reason for this. I used to sit in a Bristol changing room surrounded by a load of Bristolians, all chewing the fat and making me laugh. And I was the only non-Bristolian in that group, and it just the accent more than anything just made me laugh. So from that day forward, I'm a very laid-back guy anyway, but from that day forward, I couldn't prepare for any other game, no matter how big the game was, with out that environment. That's what I was used to, that's what I understood. And so I was very much of the mindset that, you know, once I crossed that white line, once I was in the stadium on the pitch, that's when I kicked in. And actually, distraction from what was about to happen was a good thing for me. So I would do anything to distract myself from what processes and things, and then get completely caught up in the crowd, the emotion of the occasion. And I think there's two schools of thought, as there is with most things. If you look at, it's a long-winded answer, I appreciate that. But
it's all right, you're getting there.
If
we don't have the ability to edit this live, but you're getting
fair
there.
enough. But if you look at, golf, look at golf. Not that I'm a great golfer, but it's an incredibly disciplined sport, and most of it, or 99% of it, is process-driven. Now, and they go out there and week in, week out, they produce extraordinary golf. You put them in a Ryder Cup environment where emotion, crowd, everything else comes into it, they play even better golf. So, I guess I'm sitting on the fence here.
And what about your golf? I presume the three of you play golf. But that's the chosen sport, isn't it?
What I'm trying to say is basically everyone's individual in their preparation, in how they approach games, and I think it's understanding yourself, as soon as possible. Like as early on in your career, understanding what makes you tick, what makes it work for you, that's the key.
That's interesting. We're talking about how individuals prepare there, and Simon's saying, it's really important to kind of shut things out, concentrate and focus on what you're doing. But, whether it's businesses, schools, teams, team culture and how teams come together are vitally important. And that's what I want to talk to about now. How do you define team culture, Charlie? And how do you know in your own mind whether it's good or bad? And are you willing to admit it's bad when it is?
Where do you start? So what is culture? We had this question, we were talking about this before, weren't we? How do you define it? And it is actually very difficult to define. But for me, it's about the relationships and the atmosphere that's created within your working environment, whether that's on the pitch or whether that's within the office. And you certainly know whether it's good or bad from being in it in a few moments. I think you can sense. We've all got this gut feel. You can sense what's good and what's bad, and over time, it will ultimately impact performance if it is bad.
And you can be a great team. You can go out and win every game, but there can still be bad team culture, can't there?
There can, but then that will really limit actually how long you win or successfully perform for. So if you look at any sustainably successful sports team, organisation, group of people, the reason they're sustainably successful is because there is this kind of safety net of that culture, whatever that might be. So if you take sport as a great example, you get a lot of sports teams that will have very short-term success because they've kind of piled money into it, they bought the best talent, they bought the best players, they'll win the league a couple of times on the trot, and then suddenly it will dip off. But when you look at across any sport or any industry, if you look at people that are sustainably there or thereabouts, actually they're there because there's something much bigger than just the people, just the talent. There's this kind of unwritten way you behave, there's unwritten ways you talk to each other, how you interact, and I think you can do very well with a very bad culture, but there's a very, very thick ceiling as to how long that will last. And then when you hit that ceiling, there's nothing to fall back upon to pick you back up. And you actually spend more money to try and get back to where you were. So I think culture acts as that wonderful safety net that actually, if you have it, when you do hit that ceiling, you have that reference point to go back to actually take a moment and say, well, who are we? How do we get there in the first place? Where do we need to change? Where do we need to evolve? How do we need to do things in order to get ourselves back there? So in short, yes, you can, but it's very short term.
Okay. Let's talk about players competing for places, because it's not a given that your name is on the team sheet. You have to keep at the top of your game to be picked by the coach. There must have been times, Simon, when you were competing for your place. Who were you competing against, and how were you victorious in getting picked ahead of them?
Well, funnily enough, I had the unfortunate timing of being in the England squad around the same time as Martin Johnson.
Yeah, we've heard of him.
So, unfortunately, it meant that I would essentially have to have, whenever I was given the opportunity to perform for England, I would actually have to have a man of the match winning performance each and every time. Because, I think if you're self-assured enough and confident enough in your own ability, you won't let his captaincy or his position in the team stand in the way of you, which I never did, which is why probably I went on for so long, and actually, despite him being the captain for such a long period, I managed to accumulate as many caps as I did. But it's, I think it's a measure of your character if you continue to strive and continue to put pressure on that person who's in that position. Now, did I feel like that environment necessarily gave me the possibility of ousting him? No, I didn't. I was very much of the opinion that my performance should say everything. So what I did on the pitch should be sufficient enough to get me to where I want to be, get me selected, whatever. The fact is, whether it's in a sports team or whether it's in life or whether it's in the workplace, that might never be enough. So politics come into it, conversations come into it. I never felt like the need to speak to my coach and press my case. And looking back, it's not a regret, because I don't think I'd ever do it, because that's just not me. So I can sit back now and feel very happy about the fact that I was true to myself. Nothing changed that. And you either live with what you got, or you slightly change the way you are for your own benefit, which I never wanted to do. What was the question?
Well, we'll let Charlie pick up, because Charlie, I want to put us in the scenario of being on the England training ground and you're trying to impress the coach. There are players around you that could pip you to your place.
Well, Johnny Wilkinson's pretty good, so
yeah. So what do you do? How do you approach that?
It's very similar to what Shaw's talking about. You can only do as much as you can, and it's controlling what you can control. So any opportunity to go out there on the training field, and any opportunity to get on an actual international match, you're just trying to give the best account of yourself as possible. And if it's good enough, then great. And if it's not, then you almost have to accept that this is just the situation that I'm in right now, and that can become a distraction. That becomes something that will actually ultimately put you off your performances if you're constantly worrying about somebody else.
You mentioned Johnny Wilkinson. Rumour has it he used to get up at 4 or 5 every morning and just kick ball after ball between the posts. Is there any truth in that? Even when it was dark in the winter?
He still does it now.
I don't think you could even see the goalpost.
No, I saw him a few years ago actually, but he was talking about, even though he'd retired from playing, he still couldn't switch off, and he got a call. He went to do some kicking practice. I've not done any kicking practice since I finished playing. But he went to do some kicking practice, and he said he got a phone call from his wife like 6 hours later asking him where he was, and he just got caught in the moment again. He thought he was back at Twickenham just kicking goals.
But he was at the bottom of the garden kicking over the fence.
I don't know, but it's just... But that kind of summed him up. That was his personality. He was obsessive about anything, whether it's learning a new language or learning the guitar. Goal kicking was exactly the same, and it was this thing of controlling what he could, and for him that meant being on the field for that amount of time. I felt unbelievable pressure from that. That's that external pressure, because it wasn't part of my game to be out in the field all that time. We had different strengths to our game, but because he was a goal kicker, I almost felt obliged to do the same, even though sometimes it was counterproductive.
It would have been better if you just pushed him over and you twisted his ankle.
Maybe, yeah.
Just to answer, the difficult thing being in a team, and especially if you're in a squad, in preparing for the next game, whatever. So if Charlie was on the bench, if I was on the bench, so I'm not necessarily selected to start the game, but I'm on the bench, but I still want to let it be known that I'm pissed off, I'm angry, that I'm not playing. Because it's a physical sport, because, 90% of the time we're practicing how we play, i.e. there's still massive physicality when we're training. I've got to then put the the team before my own personal game. So I could quite easily disrupt every training session by being a complete nose and smashing everything that moves, but that's going to be counterproductive to the team performance. So
were there any players that acted like that?
me, but it's a weird thing because there's all you have selection, just before you're about to go and train, let's say the last 3 sessions of your international week or club week, and your instinct is I just want to smash the hell out of that guy that's got my shirt, and yet you can't.
I never had that, Shawsey.
Well, no, you didn't want to smash anything.
That's what I mean. Right. We've talked about dedication. Johnny Wilkinson's a classic example of that, ultimate dedication to his profession. If you had to pick 2 qualities that result in a great performing team, what would those 2 qualities be? Will, let's start with you. If you go more than 2, that's fine. We'll compile a list because I think people here will find it useful because this doesn't just apply, of course, to sport. I think it applies to all walks of life.
I think kind of running with that point applies to all. If you ask anyone to look back on their career in sport or in business and talk about a team or an organisation they really enjoyed working for, very rarely they actually talk about the reason they like working there is because of the job. Very rarely, if ever. The reasons they always pull out is because they made great friends there, they made some brilliant memories, they had this kind of bigger picture, they were fighting for whatever it was. So I think if you take that, and from my time playing at Sarries and playing with Charlie, for me, when I look back at my career, it's those things that I remember. So for me, what makes a really high-performing team is a team that has unbelievable relationships with each other, and they're more than just colleagues or teammates, they're genuine friends. Outside of work and the sport as well, so that's massive. And then my second point is kind of what comes off the back of that is that there's an incredible level of trust between the group, and actually going to your first question to Charlie around kind of what makes a good or bad culture, because that level of trust, a good culture is a culture where someone can actually point out the fact that stuff's going wrong, and a bad culture is where stuff goes wrong and no one's got a good enough relationship or trust to actually say when something's going wrong. And then it just kind of peters down. And so for me, in any walk of life, sport, business, whatever it is, they're the two, for me, the two most important things. The level of relationships you have with each other, and off the back of that, the amount of trust that then generates.
Charlie?
I suppose just to back up what they both said, really, first point for me is being selfless and putting the team before yourself. As hard as that can be in any situation, to appreciate others and what they do and be openly appreciative of what they do, I think is massive for a team to be successful. And I think the other thing is about being honest with each other, honest in your own appraisal of what you give and deliver to the group. But also people don't want to be lied to. You don't want any conversation with peers or with your boss. You don't want them to bullshit you, and I think if people are honest and trustworthy in that sense, then I think you start to build those relationships that Will was talking about.
Simon, any qualities to add?
You haven't left me with much, have you? I'd say belief, in terms of success, belief is, every Premiership team, every international team will be working arguably as hard as one another. I think what sets one side apart from there is belief. So belief in the system, belief in tactics, belief in one another, and belief in how good you are.
How important is it to celebrate success when you achieve it?
I think it's hugely important. I mean, we're all retired right now.
Yeah.
We're all retired. I think I was speaking to someone earlier at the bar. You'll get to a point in retirement, and you'll look back in your career, and you'll sort of say, people ask you, how good was it? How good? And I can honestly say it's the best 25 years of my life, without any doubt. And the next 25 years, if I ever make it that far, it'll be nigh on impossible to repeat the happiness and joy I've had from it. And that's because I lived in the moment. Every experience, whether it was a loss or a victory, I embraced it. It wasn't, so you win, you celebrate, you lose, you commiserate, but you take it upon yourself and you live in that moment. A lot of, I think, professionals of this era seem to be almost robotic in their reaction to win, lose or draw. England, when they were on that great run of amazing victories, whilst it looked really impressive, and I don't know how many games it was, 11 or 12 games on the bounce, they would come off the pitch each and every time, looked miserable, and I couldn't quite get my head around it. And that's because, presumably, within the throes of that game, they made some errors. They didn't quite nail it. They didn't score as many points as they should have done, perhaps. And they, in terms of their preparation for the next game and continuing that success, their belief was that we've got to be hard on ourselves and stuff. But that moment will pass you by in a blink. And it's not to say that, I'm not sort of ranting here to sort of relieve myself of any sort of depressive tendencies, but unless you live those moments and enjoy those moments, then you come to the end of a 25-year career, or whatever period that you play for, and you go, what was it all about? Because the victories at the very, very top, they last like a second. You win, the next day it's over, it's done, you move on to the next thing. In professional sport nowadays, you'd win a Heineken or a Premiership title, the next day you'd be on a plane flying off to your summer tour. It's gone, forgotten, the next conversation, because the guys that you're now mixing with either lost that final or weren't even in the final, you're moving on. And so you have to live those moments and have to get excited when you win, get around and support each other when you lose, but live those moments.
And at club level, you two must have celebrated a few times together. What do you get up to?
Is this
Are you able to share these stories to the rest of the room?
No. Going to Shawty's point, I think it's, we were very fortunate enough to play for a decent amount of time together at the same club that actually put such a big emphasis on making memories and celebrating, spending time together. So, one of the things I remember being told by our CEO at the time was actually, if you win a trophy, at the end of that season, you've then got to give that trophy back, because then everyone else fights for it again. So actually, the trophy doesn't last very long. What lasts is the memory and the journey and the celebration of winning that trophy. That lasts, that's what lasts with you forever. I was very fortunate. We both were to be part of the first kind of double winning season at the club, when both the European and the Premiership. And everyone says, "God, that must have been amazing when the game." I said, "Yeah, it was awesome, but geez, you should have seen that night out afterwards. Like, it was incredible." But it's those things, it's those celebrations, and they're the things when you stop playing, they're the things you really kind of latch onto, because in those moments when you actually you form a connection with the people you've gone through a tremendously pressurised, stressful time. When you've come out of that together, you come out of that successfully together, and then by all means, you need to celebrate that for as long and as hard as you possibly can. And we were very fortunate to do that on a number of occasions.
Didn't you all go off to Vegas?
No, not Vegas. Unfortunately,
that was always talked about.
That
never
was one of the
happened.
ideas. Yeah. We did a couple skiing trips.
Skiing trips. Yeah.
Doesn't it sound like the most sensible thing to do when you're a
Heart
rugby
bleeds.
player? Go skiing.
I played for Toulon. We won the double, and we got driven through the streets on a skip. And they were supposed to be the Galacticos of the rugby world.
Now, if you're a footballer, when you're sent out to pasture, you may go off to the MLS or Japan and play for a few more years, then sign up to, a clothing brand, represent that and retire gracefully. What happens to rugby players? What are each of you doing now, Charlie?
So I was about to say something about your skip.
Feel free.
No, so now I'm trying to use my experience with sport, and in particular dealing with, I suppose, the anxiety and the stress that searching for that high performance brings. And I do some leadership coaching now, but focusing on stress management and how that impacts performance.
It must be very, very valuable work.
Yeah, it is when it comes. No, it's,
no, I don't mean I mean valuable for anyone. But if anyone wishes to book Charlie, you can discuss a rate afterwards. Will?
On the same marketing tool. I just sound very similar to Charlie, so we take run a consultancy. We take lessons from rugby, the sport we played, and actually how it's no different to business. So whether you take the rugby ball away, you take the job away, essentially everyone's trying to do the exact same thing. You're trying to be as high performing in your industry as you possibly can be. So we look at how we've done that as a club, contrary to what a lot of you might have read in the press recently, but how we've done that as a club, how we tried to build culture and environment, how actually that transfers directly into the business world.
Before Simon answers, we're going to put some microphones in the room in a second. So if you have a question for any of our panel, and please have some questions, because these are fascinating gentlemen that have not only some interesting stories, but some wise advice as well. So have those questions ready. We'll get the microphones round. Simon, what are you up to these days?
It's weird. In 1994, I went on an England tour to South Africa, and I was stuck in a lift with two journos. And I was at university at the time, and I didn't really know what the hell I wanted to do.
I was in primary school at the time.
Yeah, all right.
Sorry, it was.
Did we play against each other?
We actually did, weirdly enough.
So you were playing against an OAP?
Yeah.
So you're in the lift.
I was in the lift. I got asked what I would be doing. Well, it hadn't gone professional then, so the journalist asked me what I was going to do when I finished uni, and I didn't have a clue. So I just said I'd probably run a hotel or a restaurant or something. And weirdly, that was never actually my intention. But I'm now a major shareholder of the group that owns M Restaurants and Gaucho Group. So I sit on their advisory board. I also have a number of other advisory roles at board level with other companies, and I have a rugby brand called Simon Shaw Rugby, e-commerce thing, and I do some property brokerage stuff. So currently working with Nottingham Forest.
Ooh, okay,
but I'd be delighted to work with Crystal Palace on their new stadium.
And I guess you get invited, all of you, to events like this. How do you stay in shape? You guys look in great
Thank
shape.
you very much.
When professional sportsmen and women, step away from the everyday training, you're eating probably far worse than you've ever eaten before. But how do you stay in shape? How do you stay motivated to keep fit?
I always had a rule when I was playing, because obviously I started with a fairly healthy drinking culture. And I always had a rule, and I stuck by this rule the whole time I was playing and beyond. Eat, don't drink, drink, don't eat. Now that's all well and good if you can hold your alcohol, but not so advisable if you can't. But so your calorie intake is basically half of what you would be doing if you're eating and drinking. So excuse me, Julian, for setting aside your lovely dessert. I did have a little morsel.
You just had an extra glass of wine.
I pushed, yeah, exactly.
Okay, right. Questions from the floor. Who has a question for our panel? Yes, the gentleman there. If you'd like just to introduce yourself, because it's always nice to know who's asking the questions. Microphone is winding its way to you. Thank you.
I'm John Gaisford with EQ Investors. You can tell from my accent, or you might think from my accent, that I was delighted that South Africa won the World Cup. But I've been here 32 years and supported the England team for 30 years. So you can imagine the trouble with my family in South Africa over that. What I noticed in the few days in the run-up to the final, from all my South African friends and families, this country was going to shut down for this thing. It was so massive. And as an English supporter, I began to get very worried, because the whole issue of motivation, you can't say the England team wouldn't be motivated, but this is massive for South Africa. It's political, it's sport, and so on. And I really began to think, how do the English players motivate themselves after a fantastic All Black performance? And so my question, I'm eventually getting around to, is who's responsible for motivation? I always admired Alex Ferguson for being a tactical genius, but managing the motivation, the nervousness, the anxiety of the players. Whose job is that in the 5-day run to playing South Africa? Is it the coach, the captain? Is it the players? Is there a key player that says, listen guys, we have won something, but we are now got a real thing ahead of us?
Do you care who answers the question? I won't. No, I don't think he does. Take it away.
So South Africa on 2 occasions have had that political background where their entire nation is wanting this to happen, not obviously once in 95 and this time round. I think it's very, very difficult to counter that with any speech or line that any one of the coaches could deliver. It's very, very difficult. And there have been occasions in other matches where something bigger than the sport has taken over a side. So in short, it's very difficult, but usually it's dominant figures. My question has always been, with this particular England side, is I don't know the change room. I don't know. I still know a few of the players, but I don't know them well enough to know who leads the forward that. But I get the impression, just from seeing them play, that Owen Farrell is very at the forefront of that, and it used to be Dylan Hartley at the forefront of that, and I know Eddie's a huge motivating factor. My worry is when the likes of Owen Farrell are slightly having an off day, who then takes over? And I don't know them. These guys will know them better than I do. I don't know who that is in the England side. I don't see that person jumping out and rallying the troops. That was my only ever worry going into this World Cup, is when England when the opposition have come up and scuppered their plan A and sort of put some people in a box or quieten them down, what would they do next? And that obviously happened in the final.
We've got time for one more question, I think. So has anyone got a microphone in the room? We've got one more question. Was it gentleman there? Okay, we'll take two quick questions. So thank you. We're running over.
Hi there, Richard Howard from St James Place Wealth Management. We've got 3 rugby players sat here in a football club. What do you think that rugby has, what lessons that rugby has to teach football in particular, about building that team ethos that is bigger than the individuals?
I think so. Funny enough, I actually do quite a lot of work with the LMA, so League Managers Association. I've been quite fortunate to kind of run sessions with people like Mick McCarthy, Steve McLaren, these guys. And what was really eye-opening for me is actually how different football and rugby are from the outset. So yes, there are obvious learnings, but I think as two kind of models, purely by the commercial level of football, it's naturally a lot harder to drive that team ethos and culture because someone's been offered a hell of a lot more money by another club or whatever it is. That's going to tempt you, and this is 10 more noughts than rugby players get offered. So it's a lot harder from the starting point. But I do think there are definite elements where the one thing that kind of sums up for me, as a rugby player, I'm sure you to agree, this thing you hear in football where the manager's lost the dressing room. I cannot get my head around that statement at all, because for me, even if we hated our director rugby, there's still no way I'd go out and purposely play badly to get rid of our director rugby, because I want to play well for Charlie. Hopefully Charlie wants to play well for me. I've got my own sense of self-pride. I've got my family, all that kind of stuff. So I think from that point of view, football is a lot more individual than rugby, but I do think to give football, an element of fairness, the whole model of football is so different to rugby that it's actually quite hard, I think, to really fairly compare the two. But I do think there are definitely elements that can cross over between them.
Thank you. Great question. Just time for one very quick question. Thank you.
Hi, Chris Brandon. I'm a big fan of the Six Nations, but you haven't mentioned anything about that so far. Do you have any particular memories you care to share or experiences you care to share about the Six Nations?
Charlie?
Not really.
Just lie.
No, I seem to have taken a lot of abuse by the Celtic nations through the Six Nations, so maybe Shaw's has got some better stories than me, but they were never that... My best memories came from the Autumn Internationals, not necessarily from the Six Nations, so less said about that, the better, I think, from my point of view. Simon?
I think it's a very unique competition in not just the rugby world, but I think the sporting world as a whole. The history, its format, everything make it really, really, truly special. I think the envy of a lot of other sports and a lot of other competitions, I think the Rugby Championship is they're trying to create their own equivalent. I think just because of the history that's in it. means that it's always going to throw up extraordinary results that you never saw coming, all this sort of stuff. And the passion, not only from the players but the supporters, is always just bowled me over. And I remember one particular occasion where we'd beaten Wales in Cardiff, and we'd finished the game, we got on the bus, and I think it was like a last minute try that we scored that managed to get us over the line. And we boarded the bus, and the Welsh fans were absolutely livid. It may have even been a forward pass, I can't remember. But they were livid, completely livid, and they were going mental. And it was the first ever time in rugby I thought, actually, this could potentially kick off. Something actually might happen. You know, the crowd might turn. We were all on the bus, and it looked like it was one of those blacked out buses. So it looked like they couldn't see what you were doing, but you could see what they were doing. But I think because of one of the lights that shining from the stadium, it maybe caused a little bit of a light effect where you could see what was happening in the bus. And I think Lawrence might have jeered, you know, sort of egged one of the Welsh supporters on, which set the crowd alight. And they started actually moving the bus. So the bus was sort of rocking back and forward. And I was like, shit, this, you know, it's properly kicking off now. And then, so at this point, Clive Woodward said, look, we need to get this bus moving. We need to get out of here. There could be trouble ahead. And at this point, one of the Welsh fans, who by this time removed his top, and he had a dragon on one side, a tulip on the other. He's like tattooed into his chest, and he was pretty angry. And he just screamed at the top of his voice and just ran straight at the bus, which we were all amazed by. And he literally ran full tilt and headbutted the front of the bus. Had no impact on the bus whatsoever. And he knocked himself clean out. So he's now on the floor, and we're obviously laughing hysterically because it was quite funny. So
10 seconds, Simon.
Oh, sorry,
to wrap up your story. 10 seconds.
So the crowd
Getting
then,
it in the
they
air.
get even angrier, and we were like, okay, we really need to get out of here because it's getting really, really bad. At this point, Clive reiterates the fact to the bus driver, come on, let's just put the bus in gear and move on. At this point, this poor fella had been sort of dragged off slightly to the side, giving us just enough room to get out and go down the high street. But the driver had forgotten his wing mirror, and this guy stood up and clipped him straight over the back of the head. But we're off and away. Very fun.
Well, it's a nice note to end on. I'd like to thank everyone for taking part. Simon Shaw, Will Fraser, Charlie Hodgson. It's a fascinating conversation. I'll let the rest of you continue yours. It's been a pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you, guys.